The stars had never been quiet. For billions of years, the galaxy had sung with signals, radio bursts, gravitational ripples, fragments of ancient light traveling through the void like whispers from ghosts long dead. Civilizations had risen and vanished before their first messages even crossed the distance between neighboring stars. But in the year 2147, something changed. It began with a mistake. The Deep Sky Listening Array, a web of satellites orbiting far beyond Pluto, had been designed to detect the faintest signals imaginable. Humanity had built it after decades of silence from the cosmos, hoping that somewhere someone had spoken first. For 30 years, it heard nothing. Then one morning, a technician named Elena Park spilled coffee on a console. The spill triggered a cascade of system alerts. Automatic recalibrations rippled through the array as diagnostic routines attempted to compensate for the interruption. In the chaos of automated corrections, one satellite adjusted its antenna by less than half a degree. Half a degree was all it took. Suddenly, the silence broke. At first, the signal appeared like background noise, a faint, irregular pulse buried inside cosmic radiation, but the AI monitoring the array flagged it immediately. The pattern repeated, not randomly, mathematically. Prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The sequence continued for exactly 47 numbers before stopping. Then it started again. Within minutes, alarms spread across observatories on Earth. Astronomers rushed from their beds, screens lit up across the planet. Humanity had finally heard something. But the signal wasn't coming from where anyone expected. It wasn't coming from a distant star system. It was coming from the edge of the solar system, specifically from a region just beyond the orbit of Neptune, which meant something had been there the entire time. Watching, listening, waiting. Dr. Marcus Hale stared at the projection hovering above the conference table. He had spent his entire career searching for alien intelligence, but now that the evidence floated directly in front of him, his brain refused to accept it. "It's a probe," he said quietly. The room fell silent. Around the table sat representatives from every major space agency on Earth: NASA, ESA, CNSA, Roscosmos, private aerospace corporations, military observers who pretended they were not military observers. The signal replayed on the display: prime numbers, perfectly spaced, perfectly intentional, a universal language. Someone out there had left a calling card. "How long has it been there?" asked Director Alvarez. Marcus rubbed his temples. "We don't know," he admitted. "The signal only activates when our listening arrays sweep that specific frequency band. Before that, we never had equipment sensitive enough to detect it." A Chinese astrophysicist leaned forward. "You're suggesting this object has been waiting for us to become capable of hearing it?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Another scientist frowned. "Why hide?" Marcus looked up at the rotating hologram of the outer solar system. "I don't think it was hiding," he said. "I think it was waiting." The probe was discovered 3 weeks later. It took that long to isolate the exact location of the signal. The object was small, barely 50 meters across, drifting in a slow orbit among the frozen debris of the Kuiper Belt, a relic hidden in plain sight. When the first telescopic images arrived, the world changed forever. The object was smooth, metallic, perfectly symmetrical, and unmistakably artificial. News spread across Earth in less than 10 minutes. Humanity was not alone. The probe had been there for at least 10,000 years, possibly longer. Every government on Earth demanded immediate access. Every scientist demanded answers. Every religious leader struggled to explain what this meant. But the most unsettling discovery came from the probe's behavior. It had only started transmitting after humanity launched its first deep space listening arrays. It had waited. For us. Marcus Hale stood inside mission control as the first human spacecraft approached the object. The ship was called Astraeus, a small exploration vessel hastily assembled using modular components already in orbit. Humanity had rushed the mission together in less than 2 months. No one wanted to wait. The crew consisted of 3 astronauts and a swarm of remote drones. The entire planet watched the live stream. Billions of people held their breath. As Astraeus drifted closer, the probe grew larger in the cameras. Even at close range, it looked impossibly clean. No signs of damage, no micrometeor impacts, no erosion, as if time had simply refused to touch it. "Range 5 kilometers," said the flight controller. Marcus leaned forward. "Deploy the drones." 4 small robotic units drifted out from Astraeus, their thrusters firing gently as they approached the alien artifact. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the probe moved. Not physically, but something on its surface shifted. Panels unfolded like the petals of a metal flower. Lights ignited along its hull. The signal changed. The prime numbers stopped. Instead, a new pattern began. Binary code. Fast. Very fast. Recording everything, said the communications officer. Marcus watched the data stream across the screen. Can we decode it? A mathematician shook his head. Not yet. It's complex. The probe continued transmitting, then something unexpected happened. The signal shifted again. This time the pattern slowed, deliberately, as if adjusting itself, as if teaching. The first symbols appeared on the screen moments later. Simple shapes, triangles, squares, circles, basic mathematical relationships. The room filled with whispers. This is a primer, someone said, a language tutorial. Marcus felt his heart pounding. The probe wasn't just sending data. It was building a common language, step by step, across the void. 3 hours later, the first translated sentence appeared. It was not a greeting, it was not a warning, it was a question. The message read, "Are you new?" No one in the room spoke. Marcus finally broke the silence. "Send a reply." Director Alvarez hesitated. "You realize what this means?" "Yes," Marcus said. "If we answer, we announce ourselves to whoever built that probe." Silence returned. Then Marcus shrugged. "They already know we exist." He pointed to the data stream. "They waited until we could hear them." Alvarez exhaled slowly. "All right." The room sprang into motion. Linguists and AI translators worked together to construct a response using the mathematical framework the probe had provided. It took 40 minutes. Finally, the reply was ready. The Astraeus Communications Array transmitted the message. 2 words. "We are human." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the probe responded instantly. The next translated message appeared on the screen. "Welcome." Another pause. Then the second sentence arrived. "You are early." Confusion rippled through the control room. Marcus frowned. "Early?" Before anyone could speculate further, the probe transmitted again. The next message was longer. "Much earlier than expected." The room erupted with overlapping voices. "What does that mean?" "Expected by who?" Marcus held up a hand. "Quiet." Another message arrived. The translation software struggled for several seconds before stabilizing. When the words appeared, every person in the room went silent. The message read, "The others have not arrived yet." Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine. "What others?" someone whispered. As if responding directly to the question, the probe transmitted again. This system was marked for collection. The words hung in the air. Collection. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. "Ask it who marked us." The reply came instantly. "The keepers." Marcus had never heard that word before, but something about it made his stomach tighten. "What do they keep?" asked one of the scientists quietly. The probe answered, "Civilizations." The control room became completely silent. Marcus forced himself to keep thinking. "Ask why." The response took longer this time, nearly 20 seconds. When it arrived, it changed everything. To protect them. Marcus exhaled slowly. "From what?" The probe hesitated. For the first time since contact began, the signal paused. Seconds passed. Then a new message appeared. The translation struggled. Lines of code flickered. Finally, the words stabilized. "From you." No one in mission control moved. Marcus stared at the screen. "Us?" he said softly. "That makes no sense." But the probe wasn't finished. Another message followed. "Correction." The word appeared alone. Then the rest of the sentence resolved beneath it. "From what you will become." A cold silence settled across the room. Marcus suddenly realized something terrifying. The probe had not been waiting to greet humanity. It had been waiting to evaluate them, and somewhere out there, something called the Keepers had not yet arrived. But they were expected, soon. The words remained on the screen long after the probe stopped transmitting. "From what you will become." No one spoke. Inside Mission Control, dozens of the brightest minds on Earth stared at the translation as if it might rearrange itself into something less disturbing. It didn't. Marcus Hale leaned back slowly in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "Ask it to clarify," he said. The communications officer hesitated. "Clarify? What exactly?" Marcus gestured toward the screen. "All of it." The reply was sent. Within seconds, the probe responded. "Question accepted." Marcus noticed something strange immediately. The structure of the message had become more complex. The language model the probe was using had clearly adapted to human syntax at an alarming speed. It was learning. Fast. The next message appeared. This observation unit was deployed to identify emerging intelligences. Marcus frowned. Observation unit, he murmured. A scout. The probe continued. When a civilization reaches interplanetary capability, a signal is sent. Director Alvarez leaned forward. To who? He asked quietly. As if hearing him through the transmission, the probe answered. The Keepers. Marcus crossed his arms. And what happens then? The translation appeared moments later. They arrive. Simple. Direct. Terrifying. A physicist near the back of the room raised a hand. How long does that usually take? Marcus relayed the question. The probe paused, then it answered. Varies by distance. Marcus's voice felt dry as he spoke the next question. How far away are they? For the first time since communication began, the probe did not answer immediately. Instead, the signal pulsed several times, as if processing or deciding. Finally, the response appeared. Close. That single word hit the room like a shockwave. Someone whispered a curse. Marcus forced himself to stay calm. How close? He asked. The probe transmitted again. Estimated arrival, 72 years. The tension in the room shifted. 72 years. Not tomorrow. Not next week, but still, within a human lifetime. Marcus inhaled slowly. All right, he said. That gives us time. But another scientist shook her head. You're assuming they travel at conventional speeds. Marcus looked at the probe. Ask if that estimate assumes faster than light travel. The answer came immediately. Negative. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Then what does it assume? The probe responded. Sublight velocity. The room erupted. Wait. That means they're already on the way. They must have launched centuries ago. Marcus raised his voice. Quiet. He turned back to the console. Ask when the signal was sent. A few seconds passed. Then the translation appeared. Signal sent 312 years ago. The room went completely silent. 312 years. That meant the moment humanity first demonstrated the ability to leave its planet, someone, somewhere, had been notified. Marcus felt a strange mix of awe and dread. They had been watched far longer than anyone realized, and somewhere out in the galaxy, something had already begun moving toward them. The world reacted exactly as you would expect. Panic, denial, debate. Within hours, the recording of the conversation spread across the internet. Governments tried to contain it. They failed. Every language on Earth soon carried the same headline. Alien probe confirms arrival of Keepers in 72 years. Some people celebrated, others prepared for war. Religious movements exploded overnight. Entire political systems fractured under the weight of the revelation. But inside the quiet halls of the International Astronomical Council, Marcus Hale sat alone in a dark room staring at a star map. Something about the probe's answers didn't make sense. If these keepers were protectors, why had the probe warned them? Why explain anything at all? He tapped a command on the console. The transcript of every message scrolled across the screen. Marcus read it again, slowly, line by line. Then he noticed something, a subtle pattern in the phrasing. Not what the probe said, but what it avoided saying. He immediately requested another transmission window with the artifact. Astreus was still in orbit around it. Communication was trivial. The connection opened within minutes. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. This is Dr. Marcus Hale of Earth. The probe responded instantly. Identity recognized. Marcus exhaled. I have additional questions. Question accepted. Marcus hesitated. Then he asked the one thing no one else seemed to be asking. Why did you warn us? There was a long pause, longer than any previous response. The signal fluctuated slightly. When the message finally appeared, Marcus felt a chill run through him. This unit did not issue a warning. Marcus frowned. Yes, you did. You told us about the Keepers. The reply came. Information is not a warning. Marcus leaned closer. Then why give us the information at all? Another pause. The answer arrived slowly. Because the translation system had to work harder. Protocol requires full disclosure when a species achieves sentience stage 4. Marcus blinked. Stage 4? Affirmative. Marcus thought for a moment. How many stages are there? The probe answered. 7. Marcus swallowed. And what stage are the keepers? The signal paused again. When the answer appeared, Marcus felt the room grow colder. Stage 6. He took a slow breath. What's stage 7? This time the probe responded almost instantly. Unknown. Marcus sat back. Unknown? The probe elaborated, no civilization has been observed reaching stage 7. Marcus stared at the console, then he asked the question that had begun forming in his mind. What happens to civilizations that reach stage 6? The probe replied, they become keepers. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. And what does that mean exactly? The probe answered with brutal simplicity. They control the development of lesser species. Marcus thought about that. So they're like cosmic gardeners. Accurate analogy. Marcus nodded slowly. Pruning dangerous growth. Affirmative. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting at the center of his mind since the first contact. What determines if a species is dangerous? The probe responded instantly. Uncontrolled expansion. Marcus stared at the message. That's it? Affirmative. He leaned forward. Define uncontrolled. The translation appeared. A civilization that expands without limit or external regulation. Marcus laughed quietly. Then every civilization would eventually qualify. The probe paused, then answered. Correct. Marcus felt a sudden knot in his chest. So the keepers eventually what? The probe finished the thought. Intervene. Marcus forced himself to ask the next question. How many civilizations have they intervened with? The response came quickly. Side thousands. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he asked the final question. What happens to those civilizations? The probe transmitted one final sentence. They didn't need translation software to understand the tone of it. Containment. Marcus whispered the word to himself. Containment. The probe added another line. Surviving species are preserved. Marcus felt his breath slow. Preserved where? The probe answered. Controlled systems. Marcus leaned back in his chair. So the keepers collect civilizations. Affirmative. He looked at the star map again. Billions of stars. Countless worlds. How many are left free? The probe paused, longer than before, as if calculating something enormous. When the number appeared, Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment. 3. He stared at the screen. 3? Affirmative. Marcus spoke carefully, and Earth is one of them. The probe responded, for now. Marcus felt the weight of the universe settle onto his shoulders, because suddenly the message from earlier made perfect sense. This system was marked for collection. The keepers weren't coming to destroy humanity. They were coming to put it in a cage, just like every other civilization that had grown too far, too fast. Marcus looked out the window at the stars above Earth. 72 years. That was how long humanity had before the keepers arrived. 72 years to prove they didn't belong in a cosmic zoo, or 72 years to become something even the keepers had never seen before. Something beyond stage 6. Something impossible. Stage 7. The first year after the revelation was chaos. Not the loud, explosive kind people imagined in disaster movies. No cities burned, no governments collapsed overnight. Instead, the world fractured quietly. Markets destabilized, political alliances shifted, religions split into new interpretations almost weekly. Some declared the keepers angels, others insisted they were demons. A few radical groups believed humanity should welcome containment, arguing that the universe itself had already chosen its rulers. But most people felt something else. Defiance. Human history had been shaped by one simple instinct: resist control. And now the entire species had 72 years to decide how. Marcus Hale stood on the balcony of the International Research Directorate, watching the sunrise over Geneva. The world looked normal. Cars moved through the streets, drones crossed the sky, delivering packages. People walked to work with coffee cups in their hands. But beneath that ordinary surface, everything had changed. Humanity had learned something terrifying. They were not the first, and they were not free. Still can't sleep? Marcus turned. Elena Park stepped onto the balcony beside him, the same technician whose spilled coffee had accidentally triggered the discovery of the probe. History had a strange sense of humor. Marcus shook his head. Not much. Elena leaned against the railing. The probe sent another data packet last night. Marcus sighed. Let me guess, more information about the keepers. Actually, something different. She handed him a tablet. Marcus skimmed the translated message. Then he stopped. What is this? Elena smiled faintly. It's a list. Marcus looked closer. The file contained thousands of star systems, coordinates, designations, dates. These are civilizations, Elena said, or what used to be civilizations. Marcus felt a cold weight in his chest. Collected? Elena nodded. According to the probe, yes. Marcus scrolled further. Each entry contained a brief summary. Population estimates, technological level, cultural notes. The keepers hadn't simply imprisoned these species, they had cataloged them, studied them, preserved them like living artifacts. How many? Marcus asked. Roughly 4,000. Marcus stared at the number. 4,000 intelligent species. 4,000 civilizations that had once looked at the stars the same way humanity did, and every single one had eventually been contained. Any that fought back? He asked. Elena nodded slowly. Most of them. Marcus looked up. And, she shrugged, didn't matter. Over the next decade, humanity changed faster than at any point in its history. The discovery of the probe ignited a technological explosion. Space agencies merged. Military budgets were redirected into orbital infrastructure. Fusion reactors became standard within 20 years. Mars was colonized. Europa and Titan followed. Humanity spread across its solar system with desperate speed. But it wasn't just expansion, it was preparation. Every scientific field accelerated. Artificial intelligence reached levels once thought impossible. New propulsion technologies were developed. Quantum communication networks connected the entire solar system. And at the center of it all sat the alien probe, still drifting silently beyond Neptune. Watching. Answering questions. Teaching. The probe had become humanity's greatest source of knowledge and its greatest mystery. Because the more Marcus spoke with it, the more something bothered him. The probe answered almost everything, except one question. Why help humanity at all? 30 years passed. Marcus Hale was old now, white hair, slower steps, but his mind remained sharp. He stood once again in mission control as a new generation of scientists prepared another transmission. But this time the question wasn't about the keepers, it was about the future. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. We have a request. Question accepted. Marcus hesitated. Then he said the words carefully. We want to know how the keepers will judge us. There was a pause. Then the probe responded. Judgment is based on behavioral analysis. Marcus frowned. What behavior? The answer appeared. Expansion rate, resource consumption, military capability, interspecies aggression. Marcus nodded slowly. So basically, whether we act like a threat. Affirmative. A young scientist nearby whispered something. Marcus turned. What is it? The scientists swallowed. If they're measuring expansion rate, Marcus understood immediately. Humanity had already colonized half the solar system. They were expanding faster than any species in the probe's database. Marcus looked back at the console. That's bad, isn't it? The probe responded. High probability of containment. Marcus sighed. Then what would convince them not to contain us? The probe paused. When the response appeared, it shocked everyone in the room. Stop expanding. The room erupted. That's insane. That would freeze our civilization. Marcus raised a hand for silence. You're saying we must stop spreading to survive. Affirmative. Marcus thought about that. Humanity's greatest instinct, curiosity, exploration, the drive to push beyond every boundary. The keepers considered that instinct dangerous. Marcus asked the obvious question. What happens if we don't stop? The probe answered with the calm certainty of a machine. Containment is inevitable. Marcus leaned back in his chair. So those are our choices. He spoke quietly. Stay small or lose our freedom. The probe did not respond, because there was nothing more to say. But humanity had never been good at staying small. 20 more years passed. By then, the solar system looked completely different. Orbital habitats surrounded Earth. Mars held millions of settlers. Gigantic shipyards floated above Jupiter's moons. And deep beneath the oceans of Europa, humanity had discovered something extraordinary. Life. Primitive, microscopic life. It was the first alien biology humanity had ever found, and it changed everything. Because suddenly humanity wasn't just expanding, it was becoming something new. A species capable of spreading life itself across dead worlds. Terraforming projects began within months. Entire planets were slowly reshaped. The solar system was no longer just being colonized, it was being transformed. Marcus watched all of this from the quiet halls of the Directorate. He was 83 years old now, and he knew exactly what the probe would say. Expansion. Uncontrolled. Dangerous. Eventually the Keepers would arrive, and they would see a species spreading across its star system faster than any before it. Marcus had spent decades asking the probe questions. Now he had one final idea. One last gamble. He scheduled a private transmission. No audience. No observers, just him and the ancient machine beyond Neptune. The signal connected. Identity recognized. Marcus Hale. Marcus smiled faintly. Still remember me? Affirmative. Marcus took a slow breath. I need to ask something important. Question accepted. Marcus leaned forward. What is stage 7? The probe paused. Unknown. Marcus nodded. You've said that before, he continued carefully, but you've observed thousands of civilizations. Affirmative. And every one of them reached stage 6 at most. Correct. Marcus stared at the screen. What stopped them? The probe processed the question, then answered, external control. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Keepers. Affirmative. Marcus smiled slightly. So every civilization that grows powerful enough gets contained before it can go further. Correct. Marcus leaned back. Then stage 7 might not be impossible. The probe remained silent. Marcus continued. It might just be something the Keepers have never allowed to happen. The signal flickered slightly. Marcus could almost imagine the machine thinking. He asked one final question. If a civilization reached stage 7, he paused, would the Keepers still be able to contain it? The probe took longer to answer than ever before, nearly a full minute. When the response appeared, Marcus felt a strange spark of hope. Probability low. Marcus smiled, because suddenly humanity's path was clear. They didn't need to slow down. They didn't need to hide. They didn't need to beg the Keepers for mercy. They needed to do something no civilization had ever been allowed to do. Grow faster, stronger, further, until even the Keepers couldn't stop them. Marcus looked out toward the stars one last time. 42 years remained before the Keepers arrived. 42 years for humanity to attempt the impossible. 42 years to become the first stage 7-7 civilization in the history of the galaxy, or the last free one. 42 years. That was the number that defined the rest of Marcus Hale's life. 42 years before the Keepers arrived. 42 years before humanity would be judged by a civilization older than most stars visible from Earth. At first, the world did not fully understand the significance of Marcus's final conclusion. The transcripts of his conversation with the probe circulated through academic circles, but to most people it sounded like philosophy, not strategy. Stage 7. A hypothetical level of civilization that had never existed. But the scientists understood, and once the scientists understood, the engineers followed, then the governments, and finally the entire species. Humanity would not stop expanding. Humanity would accelerate. The project that began 20 years later would become the most ambitious undertaking in human history. They called it the acceleration. It started quietly. At first, it was simply a new class of research facilities placed in orbit around the sun, massive structures designed to harvest the full energy output of the star. The first solar collectors were small compared to what would come later. But each year, they multiplied. Thousands, then millions. A growing swarm of machines orbiting the sun. Humanity had begun building the first layer of a Dyson Swarm. The probe observed everything. It never commented. But it recorded every change, every advancement, every new technology humanity unlocked in its desperate race towards something greater. Within 10 years, the solar system had transformed again. Energy was no longer scarce. With nearly unlimited power available, human industry exploded. Factories in orbit built ships continuously. Terraforming engines reshaped planets faster than anyone believed possible. And artificial intelligence advanced to levels once considered theoretical. Not because humanity had created a single superintelligence, but because they had created millions. Entire networks of AI systems working together across the solar system, each specialized, each evolving, each contributing to the expansion. Humanity was no longer a single civilization. It had become a distributed intelligence spanning billions of kilometers. And still the Keepers had not arrived. Marcus Hale did not live to see the final phase. He died at the age of 91, peacefully, in a small room overlooking Lake Geneva. But before he died, he left behind one final message to humanity, a simple statement recorded during his last interview. If Stage 7 exists, he said, it probably isn't just about technology. It's about becoming something the universe has never seen before. The recording ended there. For years, people debated what he meant, until someone finally realized the answer. Stage 7 was not just power, it was scale. 30 years before the Keepers arrived, humanity made the discovery that changed everything. The breakthrough came from a group of physicists studying quantum vacuum energy. For centuries, scientists had known that empty space was not truly empty. Even a perfect vacuum contained vast amounts of latent energy, but no one had ever found a way to access it. Until then. The first prototype vacuum energy reactor was the size of a city. The second was the size of a continent. But the third was placed in orbit around the sun, and when it activated, it produced more energy than every star in the solar system combined. Humanity had discovered a power source that no longer depended on stars. The Dyson Swarm became obsolete overnight, because now humanity could build anywhere, anywhere at all. The expansion began again, but this time it did not stop at the edge of the solar system. It burst outward into interstellar space. Fleets of automated colony ships launched in every direction, not hundreds, not thousands, millions, each carrying the tools necessary to build new civilizations from nothing, each guided by the vast network of human and artificial intelligence now linked across the solar system. Humanity was no longer confined to one star. It was becoming something else. A species that could replicate itself across the galaxy, exactly the kind of species the Keepers feared most. 10 years before the predicted arrival, the probe transmitted a new message. For the first time in over a century, it spoke without being asked. Alert. Humanity immediately responded. What is it? The reply came quickly. Keeper vessel detected. The room monitoring the transmission went silent. Distance? Someone asked. The probe answered. 3.1 light years. The Keepers had arrived earlier than expected, but humanity was no longer the same civilization that had discovered the probe 72 years earlier. The solar system alone now held over 300 billion humans. Artificial minds outnumbered biological ones by a factor of 20. And beyond the solar system, thousands of human colonies were already forming around nearby stars. Expansion had not slowed, it had exploded. Marcus Hale's theory had become humanity's guiding principle. Grow faster than anyone can stop you. The first image of the Keeper vessel arrived 2 days later. It was enormous, not just large, staggeringly large, nearly the size of Earth's moon, a dark geometric structure drifting silently through interstellar space. Its surface was covered in layers of ancient machinery. Civilizations older than humanity had likely seen that same ship arriving above their worlds, and then disappeared into containment forever. But when the Keepers arrived in the solar system, something unexpected happened. They stopped. The massive vessel remained at the edge of the system, silent, observing. Humanity waited. Then the transmission arrived, not from the probe, from the Keeper vessel itself. The message appeared across every communication network on Earth, Mars, and the thousands of orbital habitats surrounding the Sun. Unknown civilization. State your developmental status. For the first time in history, humanity spoke directly to the beings who had controlled the evolution of the galaxy for millions of years. The response was simple. Human civilization. Origin system soul. There was a long pause, then the Keepers responded again. This system was previously marked for collection. Humanity answered, we are aware. Another pause. The next message arrived slowly. Observation indicates uncontrolled expansion. Humanity did not deny it. Yes. The Keeper vessel remained silent for nearly an hour. Across the solar system, billions of humans waited. Finally, the message appeared. Containment protocol initiated. But before humanity could respond, something else happened. The probe beyond Neptune transmitted again. A message directed not to humanity, but to the Keepers. For the first time in its 10,000-year existence, the ancient machine addressed its creators. Observation update. There was a pause. Then the probe sent one final line. Civilization has exceeded stage 6 parameters. The silence that followed lasted nearly 3 minutes. Then the Keeper vessel responded. Explain. The probe answered. Expansion no longer limited to single system. Energy production exceeds stellar output. Civilization distributed across multiple intelligence networks. There was another long pause. Then the probe transmitted the final statement. Possible stage 7 emergence. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Keepers hesitated. Minutes passed. Then the massive vessel transmitted a message to humanity. Clarification requested. Humanity responded. Go ahead. The next sentence would be studied by historians for thousands of years. If you are stage 7, why have you not attempted to control lesser species? Humanity's answer came from a young systems engineer on Mars. Her reply was transmitted across the entire solar system, because we remember what it feels like to be small. Silence followed. Then slowly, the massive Keeper vessel began to turn. Its engines ignited, and for the first time in millions of years, the Keepers left a civilization free. The final message they sent before departing was short. Observation continues, because somewhere in the vast darkness of the galaxy, something new had appeared. Not a conqueror, not a keeper, something the universe had never seen before. A civilization that had grown powerful enough to dominate the stars and chosen not to. Stage 7 had begun.